everyone, welcome back to Embroidery Tutorials. We are stitching our way through my 90 variation chain stitch sampler, which you can get the pattern for in my Etsy shop if you would like to stitch along with us. This video is going to be pretty short today because we're just covering two really easy stitches, open and double chain stitch. Both of these are some nice wider patterns of chain stitch that you don't get a lot from this. So we're going to be doing them on the double line that I've created around the outside of this circle 2 in the sampler. We're going to start out with open chain stitch, which has a lot of other names: ladder stitch, square chain stitch, there's a couple others. Embroidery stitches get a lot of different names from a lot of different regions. It just happens. This is a pretty simple stitch, but if you aren't doing it quite right at first, then it can seem really odd, not so confusing, but the stitch will want to like pucker in on itself. And I was a little confused the first time I did it by how these stitches were getting held out. So I'll give you some tricks here to make sure that your stitches are all smooth and even and don't try to pull in on themselves. Now, since we are doing 2 stitches on this outside circle, you'll want to make sure that you only stitch halfway with this first one. You can draw some lines, if like I did, to decide which half of the circle you're going to be stitching, or you can just freehand it. Either way works. We're going to start this stitch by coming up wherever you are beginning your half of the circle. You can start on the inside or the outside line, it does not matter. So you're going to come up on one side and then go back down on the other side, directly across, just nice and parallel from where you started. Don't pull your thread all the way through though. You want to make sure that we have a nice loop of thread left on top of the fabric. And then you're going to come back up on the outside ring, 1 stitch length away. As you come up, your needle is going to go through the loop you created, but you still don't want to pull it all the way tight. Don't do that until you put your needle back in the fabric, which you're going to do on the inside ring, parallel to where you came out. And then leave your needle halfway in the fabric and then pull the slack tight. Just use your finger and thumb to pull that extra thread tight. Both sides of the loop that you're creating need to be stabilized as you're pulling your slack and making that loop tight. So that's why leaving the needle halfway into the fabric and then pulling on your leftover thread is the best way to get a nice smooth line here that won't pucker or pull in on itself or just slacken on one of the sides. So once you have pulled it nice and tight, hold on to your leftover thread, to the new loop that you've created. Just link a finger through it and keep it nice and tight on top of the fabric as you pull that needle all the way through, once again leaving yourself a good amount of slack before you come up on the outside ring for that next stitch. Again, coming through the loop that you've created and then going back down inside that loop still, but leave the needle halfway through. Once you've got your needle into the fabric, you can release the previous loop and grab the next loop that you created to pull that slack tight and get that nice even U. Now, once you get to the end of your half circle here and you need to finish off this stitch, you do have to do things a little bit differently. So as you come up through the fabric inside your loop, you're going to continue to secure your previous loop with your fingers. Make sure that you're holding out some slack because you have to go ahead and tack down this corner. So you're going to create a small tacking stitch here. It's better to pull your thread a little tighter and create sort of a diagonal where your next corner is going to be, rather than having it too loose, because the thread will actually sort of stretch to where you need it to be, but you still don't want to pull it too tight. So create a little tacking stitch to tack down that first corner, and then you're going to come back up on the next corner and go through that loop again. If it's a little difficult to do that, you can come back up and then just slide your needle underneath the thread rather than trying to do it all in one motion. And then you're just going to do another little tacking stitch on that other corner to evenly tack down the last U, and that's it, you're all good. Now we are going to try out double chain stitch, which I will note there's a stitch, I believe it's called open feather stitch, which looks almost exactly the same as this, but it is slightly different in the way that it's stitched. So we are going to start out much like we did on open chain stitch by coming up on the outside of the circle and going back down on the inside in that sort of parallel fashion. But this time we are actually creating a triangle rather than a U, so we don't have to worry about trying to keep both sides even as we go. We're just going to come back up on the outside circle, go underneath that loop, and pull it tight. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now your next stitch is going to be another triangle that, together with your first one, creates a little square shape. So you're going to go back down through the fabric at your starting inner point, and then make sure you're leaving some slack so that you have a loop on top of the fabric. Then you're going to come up on the inside, parallel with your previous stitch, and go through that loop and pull it tight, and you see you have this nice square with a line through the center. Now you can continue in this same way all the way to the end of your half circle, and I will note here you can do all of your lines facing in the same direction, and then you can also alternate your lines so that you get this sort of zigzag triangular shape around your double chain stitch. Either one works, and it's really just as simple as where you're coming up for your next stitch. Might take a little bit of thought process at first to make sure that you continue to come up in the proper place to keep your pattern going, but it creates some really nice look, and this is a nice sort of wide pattern that would go really well on cuffs of sleeves or on a collar. It makes a really good circular pattern to sort of finish off any sort of embroidery hoop with a phrase in the center. It can look like lattice work around the outside. You could work a lot of flowers and vines going around and under it. Lots of things that you could do with both open and double chain stitches. So I hope that you will try out both of these and let me know how they go. Tell me in the comments below if you're having any issues, and I would love to answer any questions that you may have. This is a pretty easy one to finish off. As you get to the end, you just want to make sure that your final stitch closes off that square, and then as you come up through the loop, instead of going anywhere into another loop, you're just going to do a tiny tacking stitch as usual to tack down that final loop into place. Alright you guys, so if you've been following along, we have now gotten through 30 different variations of chain stitch on these first two circles. We have covered Lazy Daisy and all of its variations, we covered Fly Stitch and all of its variations, and we've covered several different variations of chain stitch itself. It's only going to get crazier from here. Some of these stitches are really weird. Some of them you may never have a reason to use, but they're really satisfying to try out and to get right, and it just makes me feel very successful. They also give a lot of awesome textures on fabric, and so I would absolutely love it if you would follow along, try these stitches out, learn them for yourself, and I would love to see what you guys can create with them. I look forward to seeing you guys in the future as we move on to our third circle, where we're going to be covering a lot more variations of, you guessed it, chain stitch. Go grab one of the patterns in my Etsy shop. You can still catch up super easily. You have plenty of time to go back and watch all the videos for the first two circles, and I will see you back for circle number 3. Thanks so much for watching.